Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. If you like acronyms, this is the right place to be. We have the CSO of ATPCO, the CCO of ARC, and the director of OCS at IATA, and me, the SVP. So I've been calling this the alphabet soup of airline innovation. We certainly know that the airline industry is undergoing a massive transformation. We heard a lot about that this morning already. Dynamic pricing, modern retailing, and offer order management are no longer just concepts, but they are becoming reality. Making these changes work at scale requires collaboration at an unprecedented level. In the next 40 minutes, we will explore how these three organizations, IATA, ATPCO, and ARC, are working together to move the industry forward. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. On the far end, we have Alan Murray Hayden, Director of Airlines, Airports, and Security Operations Compliance Solutions at IATA. Steve Solomon, he is Chief Commercial Officer at ARC. And Tom Gregorson, he is Chief Strategy Officer at ATPCO. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also want to give you a chance to ask our panelists some questions. They're very brave. They've put themselves out there to take your questions, so let's not let them off the hook. Make sure you are logged into the app and you can submit your questions there, and we will get to as many of those as we can toward the end of the session. But before we dive into the discussion, we would like to start with a quick poll for sort of a pulse check of the audience and really your thoughts about the industry. We're wondering how many of you think that the industry sees IATA, ATPCO, and ARC as working together, not just occasionally, but actively collaborating to move the industry forward. So please take a minute and record your answers. Yeah, and I see we do have the results now. So, and sure enough, about 56%, the majority are saying that they believe the industry does see that there is some collaboration. Interesting, 10% say they think the industry believes you all work completely independently. So we'll get into some of that with a discussion. Let's start, I think, with each of you briefly describing the purpose of each of your organizations. And Alan, maybe if you want to start us on that one.
Okay. I think that nearly all of you, well, I'm sure all of you know what IATA is, but our role is to represent, serve, and lead the industry. There's kind of three main areas we work on. The first one is standards, and I think we're going to get onto that later on. Standards are absolutely critical. That is what enables collaboration across, not collaboration, that's what enables, innovative solutions. The second area is advocacy, and I think you all know that IATA is very strong in advocacy, especially in safety and security. And the last area is in solutions, which maybe some of you aren't so familiar with. And those solutions can be things like the financial clearinghouse, a lot of passenger compliance solutions, but also in the financial area. So yeah, those are the three main areas, and we're going to get into those later on.
Yep. Okay. Steve?
So to understand ARC's purpose, I think a little bit of history is important. So similar to ATPCO, our roots go back to the 1940s as part of the Air Traffic Conference of America. And ARC's role at that time was all around the accreditation of agencies to help support airlines understanding who the counterparties are that are distributing their product. And the roots of that are what we now call settlement. And for us, it's the Area Settlement Plan doing that in the United States. That's evolved over the years. About 30 years ago, we realized we had a really, really rich database of this ticketing data, and so started the foundations of our early data products as well. So in addition to providing all the settlement and reporting services of today, the data and analytics part of that is part. And, supporting airline strategies, whether it's on the distribution side, network, revenue, et cetera, that's really what drives what we do. And so our priorities are really a reflection of what's important to the industry.
Okay. Tom?
ATPCO, as Alex said, 60-year anniversary. We were founded in 65 from the ATA. Our articles of incorporation were that we were here to collect and distribute tariff data at the time it was called, as well as prorate manual information at the time. So really are focused all along for all 60 years on collection and distribution of what I would call fair and fare-related data, and making sure the airlines actually earn what they're intended to earn through the settlement, through the proration settlement. And we've stayed true to that vision and purpose ever since the beginning.
Okay. So,
isn't it ironic that the theme of today is tariffs? Well, tariffs, look at what's going on today, and you're talking about tariffs. I mean, this is the man that's going to provide visibility on all the tariffs worldwide. Thanks, Tom.
It's a nice little connection there that you've made. So let's briefly set the historical context, because where we were 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, as far as the interconnectedness between your organizations, was certainly very different than it is today. What has changed over the years, and why are you working more closely together now? And I don't know who wants to jump in there.
I can start us off on this one. I think an example of some of the things that we're doing are really a result of the fragmentation that's kind of existed within the industry for so long. And we've seen that, the complexity of modern airline retailing, it requires collaboration to make things more effective for the airlines. This is an incredibly capital-intensive business, and forget about all the technology that we're talking about now. Just the core of aviation is so capital-intensive, and you have to recognize that. And so, thinking about how do we help the industry optimize the investments that they're making is something that benefits from collaboration in terms of understanding the diverse perspectives of the various stakeholders, so that centralized organizations can try to figure out how can we deliver value in a scalable manner.
I actually began at IATA 20 years ago yesterday. It was my 20th anniversary yesterday. When I look back over that time, when I joined IATA, it was a very cozy, comfortable place. There was a huge amount of collaboration across the industry, and a little bit sleepy as well, to be honest. I think we all have to admit that. At that stage, we went through a major organizational change. I'm not sure if any of you remember Giovanni Bisognetti. I think he was involved with Orbitz back then as well. I think he was the CEO. He came into the organization and said, we are getting destroyed by the low-cost carriers. Starting back then, we need to figure out how we're going to do things differently. And so we went through a major change, and it was all about, challenging the status quo. And I think we've gone through a huge change. And in some ways, that may have been that was certainly very uncomfortable for the IATA people, but also to different organizations across the value chain. I think you probably went through the same thing, and we all went to our own little way, and we all went a bit in our own direction. But what I've seen in the last couple of years is we've really started to come back together again. Again, we've got to keep on challenging things. We've got to really push the boundaries, because if we don't, the low-cost carriers will. But I see that we're working much more collaboratively over the last couple of years. And you see that. Look at Offers and Orders. Look at NDC. Look at all the changes we're making. I think it's been, we've gone away from one another, but we're starting to come back again, which is great.
Now, Tom, what would you call out as what has changed over the years and why there has been more?
It's been an interesting journey. So I go back maybe 15, 20 years. I've been in the industry a long time, and 20 years ago, I think we were in the age of automation. And at the time, IATA was going from paper and trying to say, how do you instill the paper? So there was IATA resolutions. They actually are the foundation of ATPCO rule categories that actually are how we actually price and create it. So we created a data and the automation around those. We worked together with ARC and IATA when the settlement process was kind of very manual and antiquated. So we had created a joint product called First and Final, where we actually, all three of the organizations says, we have a great Compass database where we can store data. We have the settlement services, which is how do you connect to it? And then we had proration. We married those three services into one in order to automate that. So that was really the time we were automating together, and we found a lot of collaboration. And I think as Steve and kind of Alan said a little bit, is what's changed is we all are kind of going to now offer and orders, and we're all trying to understand how really do you make these pieces to fit together. So I think we're now at a spot again where we're coming together and saying, how do we actually unlock that capability at the industry level in order to move it forward? So I think we're kind of back to the same spirit we were maybe 20 years ago and saying, how do we actually unlock the next generation of capabilities?
And before we continue on with some of the more specifics about the collaboration, we do know, of course, that each of your organizations brings some really specific expertise to the industry. Can you each share one or two or three specific initiatives that your organization has led to really help transform and to advance airline retailing?
Steve, want to start us off? Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of examples that I'd like everyone to be aware of. I mentioned before kind of ARC's roots being in kind of settlement, that accreditation of agencies and the reporting and settlement of transactions. That's things like cash and credit card billing, et cetera. But, in the pick your generation that you want, right? Like, so, 30, 40 years, this Edifact-centric world, it was kind of the same. But then as airlines realized that there's a lot more value they can get out of their distribution channels, the concept of NDC emerged probably at this point, like 12 plus years ago. And so I know some people want to take the N out of it, but all jokes aside related to that, the ability for airlines to have more control over who has access to their content and understanding who's doing the ticketing or selling is important for them. And so early on in that journey, ARC established what we call now our Direct Connect program. And it's really the ability to offer airlines the ability, some of them do it direct, some through aggregators, et cetera, but the ability to have all the goodness of what they got through settlement, but apply that to their NDC strategies. And that's the first step on this journey towards orders. And so, right now through this work, and it's collaborative, there's working groups and a lot of industry forums that are part of this that each of our organizations are represented on. We have 37 airlines in this program. Over, about 20% of ARC's transactions are NDC transactions today. And we're seeing, give or take on the month, about 900 different travel sellers accessing this content and reporting and settling through our platform. And so that's really powerful in terms of like the pace with which we've been able to grow that adoption. We're still in the hockey stick curve of that growth, but it's really encouraging to see for the industry, like the ability to kind of once you put your mind to it, you have the standards to do it, to see that growth. The second one is kind of the next step in that journey, which is around orders. And so beginning in 2023, we started having one-on-one conversations with airlines to really understand their order strategy. And that's an example of an incredibly capital-intensive transformation for them internally. And the team learned a lot. We talked to about 10 airlines, and we saw that while many airlines, it was led by the revenue accounting function, others it wasn't. And as we had these one-on-ones, and we started asking questions about, how's this going to work? Have you thought about the following? We realized that some of the work that was happening at the industry level was not necessarily reflective of all the broad implications of this change as we move to offers and orders. And so asking questions about, have you thought about how your data ecosystem is going to stay complete when you're moving to this new standard and this new framework? And when you talk to revenue accounting, like they had what they needed through the orders framework, but when you talk to other commercial functions, there was a gap. And so the work that our team in partnership with a lot, some airlines who are in the room today, is and IATA hosts a lot of these industry, I forget the acronym, but it's like the orders something or other. And so, but the ability to kind of bring those voices into these forums, right, to understand, hey, like we've worked on something, but maybe it's not perfect, or maybe there's a way to improve. And by bringing a voice from multiple organizations into these forums is really, really powerful. And I'm really proud of the work that the ARC Orders Working Group has done over the last couple of years to kind of highlight the opportunities we have to make orders better for airlines. And I'm hopeful that many of that will be reflected in the work that the early adopter airlines bring to market.
Just like you said, orders, and I started out, we are really focused on offers, and we see that the offer generation or the offer creation process is in a state of transformation. So we're really working on saying, how do we unlock that capability? How do we go to the next stage of offer creation? That's where Alex mentioned this morning, product catalog is going to be a fundamental piece that instead of having to pre-construct or pre-create all of the different permutations of your offers through fares and rules, actually using a product catalog to be able to create just your product composition and allow yourselves to be able to create more dynamically the products that you want to put in front of the customer that's going to delight the customer is one that we're unlocking. We're also trying to work to say, okay, if we're really moving to more of a next generation of automation, which is a science-based offer creation using machine learning and AI, it's really going to need data. And we're really saying, what are the areas that we can help create a data clearing, if you will, that can actually feed that offer generation moving forward. And then maybe kind of like ARC, we also are very proud of our industry governance process. We have really good engagement with the airlines. We're a fully airline-owned company, and we work closely with our owners, as well as all the airline constituents around that. And then we bring together design groups where we say, okay, here is the airline's kind of needs and capabilities that they would like to achieve, as well as the systems and the enablers of that. And we are doing a really good job of having a conversation saying, how do you really deliver product or offers from beginning all the way into the channels and get that out there? So those are the key initiatives we are focused on at ATPCO.
Okay. And Alan, what are some specific things that IATA has been doing?
Okay. The first thing you asked about the initiatives which IATA lead, I don't like the word lead in this situation. We're owned by the airlines. So you, the airlines, define exactly what we should be doing. We just facilitate that. So, in some ways we're kind of reflecting exactly what you want to do. If we then get down to the specifics, I think the work which has been done in terms of NDC, defined standards in NDC and offers and orders is absolutely being critical for this industry. I cannot express, again, I'm a generalist across IATA. I look after a number of different business units. Standards are absolutely critical because what you need to do, and you see it in areas where there's no standards, you get all the different parties and the vendors all going off in their own direction, and then nothing really changes. When I look at things like One ID on the contactless travel space, we haven't had such strong standards in the last couple of years, and it just goes nowhere. So what IATA's really trying to do is bring all of that back together. We've now launched the different standards, and then as soon as you have standards, vendors can start competing with one another. They can all start developing solutions for the industry. And I think that's what's really happened in the NDC and offers and orders. So that's one area where we've really focused in on the standards. On the other area, which we're starting to do in this area, we do it in many other areas, but in this area we haven't done it so much. Sometimes all those external vendors competing with one another, they solve maybe 90% of the puzzle. But you get another 10% of the puzzle where the market doesn't necessarily work, where you need centralized information, typically in compliance solutions where it comes down to regulations or taxation information, and you do need one organization in there. So what IATA is really, really good at is standards to, facilitate all of the independent companies to develop stuff. And then that other 10%, we look and say, where's the market not working and where exactly can we develop solutions which will address those points? And that's something ourselves and ATPCO are looking at is, what are the last couple of areas where we really, really need to work on? And then can we come up with industry solutions which fix those problems?
So let's dive a bit deeper then on the collaboration that is taking place. How are your organizations working together to drive transformation? And Steve, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I think the first one that comes to mind that's an example that many of your organizations benefit from is Direct Data Solutions. And Direct Data Solutions is a product that's offered jointly by combining ARC and IATA's settlement data through the BSP and ASP data respectively. Plus, the third leg of that stool is the airlines who are part of this program who are contributing their direct channel transaction data. And so this program, introduced about 12 years ago, has grown to be over 110 airlines actively participating in the program. We have a pipeline of about another 10 who are planning right now to join this year. And Tom mentioned kind of the governance processes and trust that's around allowing industry-owned organizations to provide these types of products and services. And that's really what's at the ethos of DDS. Like there's a lot of structure around it that ARC and IATA's teams jointly manage on behalf of the industry to make sure that there's very, very clear rules so that there's fairness across this program, especially given the sensitivity of this ticketing data that's being contributed. So that's, the first example I'll share.
Okay. Alan,
Yeah, I think, you and Steve, you've already mentioned GDS, which we work very closely on, but, that's not the only area. If you look at the accreditation of travel agents in the US, we work extremely closely on that where, it's effectively a joint program. With ATPCO, again, ATPCO has been fundamental in helping develop those standards for offers and orders. So yeah, that's a really close area of cooperation. And then in the future, we're currently working on a program where for taxes, fees, and charges, which I think we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. But I think TFCs account for about 20% of the pricing of tickets. And you look at how it's done today, and I'm new to this area. I'm looking kind of going, this can't be true. How inefficient the processes are and how we could actually be helping apply tax, fees, and charges better to reduce the cost. So, rather than just applying general taxes, fees, and charges, let's customize it for specific travelers and charge them the lowest taxes which are applicable. Yeah, and that's another area which ourselves and Tom, IATA and Tom and ATPCO are working really closely together.
Yeah, kind of echo those. Maybe starting with the kind of offer creation, we work very closely with IATA. They have an airline product management working group, which is really focused on product catalog and product management moving forward. We are a participant in that working group and making sure that as we build the data standard and data definition, we're sharing each other's wisdom of what we're finding out in an area to kind of build a standard that works through the NDC framework. And then we're building the product catalog data exchange that actually can feed that standard, if you will, and populate the standard with the data in order to source it. So that's one that we've worked very well together on collaborating to saying, how do we actually move forward with offers and orders? And as Alan mentioned, one of the biggest barriers we still see kind of still out there is really taxation. We see taxation right now. It's really lacking in a couple dimensions. It's missing, I would say, the depth of the tax information you need. We do a really good job, I would say, or a pretty good job on the passenger taxes, saying with the transportation taxes between the work that we've done together, but we know we need to go to the next step. How do you address ancillary taxes? Those will be your next big piece as you start to expand your offer composition, have more ancillaries in there. You don't want to have Big Brother knocking on your door saying you under-collected the taxes for that. So how do we build the capability to do that? And then moving from data to automation. How do you actually move from data to automation? So those are all the items that, IATA and ourselves are working together and saying, how do we create that roadmap to move it forward? On the ARC side, I'd say there we actually are trying to share knowledge. They're very strong on the order and settlement piece. We're strong on the offer piece. So we participate in their NDC barrier working group, saying this is what we know, and kind of they enable to do it. They sit on our dynamic offers working group, bringing their knowledge and experience together. So we're working together to make sure we share the wisdom of both organizations to make sure we move it forward in order to do it. So I think those are some meaningful collaboration steps that we're doing to really make sure that we're not going too far astray in one way or the other, but to align kind of initiatives.
Yeah, building on it. So first, Tom just renamed one of our working groups.
Sorry about that.
So we like to think of it as the NDC Advancement Working Group as opposed to barrier. But to get advancement, you have to overcome barriers. But that's actually a really good example where that group was formed in 2023. But a lot of work is led by participation from the three of our organizations. Includes airlines, includes travel tech providers, includes agencies. And what started as kind of a focus on NDC in the corporate channel really expanded to be like just how do we advance NDC in this industry as a whole? A series of best practices were identified through the work in terms of sharing like what's working, what's not, and how can we jointly solve for it to make it work for the entire ecosystem. And so that's a practical example where there's a standard, but the rubber hits the road in terms of the operationalization and really trying to focus on how to make that work for everyone. The other thing, and I'll share for Tom too, there's a lot of things that organizations do that are like, they're not super sexy and it's not industry buzzword, but there's a lot of plumbing that keeps this industry moving forward. And so things like sharing of the revenue booking designator information, that's really powering a lot of products behind the scenes so that when all of you kind of use these various tools, they work seamlessly. There's those types of examples where there's an information exchange on our side or data exchange to just keep everything running really effectively.
And I know in addition to all these examples that you've shared, there's also some efforts at better strategic alignment, like at the board level and things. Can you share some of that?
Yeah, I'll start maybe. We made a concerted effort to make sure that we align on kind of priorities and actions. So we did a meaningful step in my mind between us and IATA about a year and a half ago. We signed a charter where we said, okay, how do we work better together with moving forward with offers and orders? And then as part of that, we actually had a nice debate, I would say, at the start of that to really talk about how does the offer and order journey work and move forward? And I think we started that 18 months ago with a little bit different, I would say, focus. IATA was focused, I would say, on end vision. We were focused on transformation, and we didn't really talk well thinking that we're actually competing each other, and it was not the case. It was just had a different path or different focus that we're trying to get to, all wanting to get to end state. So we did a work with them to really kind of map out an aligned view of how here's current state, here's end state, and then put in how do we move forward together, and we published that, shared that with the airline community to make sure we're resonating and communicating those together. So that was one step that is meaningful. Similarly, I would say with us and ARC, we actually ensure that we have, I would say, executive meetings. So we meet at the executive level on a regular basis to make sure we understand what they're working on, what we're working on, to make sure that we are talking to the airlines as consistently as we can, sharing the different perspectives, but making sure we understand the other person's perspective and then aligning initiatives. So we think it's important to really start at the top. Make sure you have a vision of what you're going for, a roadmap in an area, and then try to execute against that.
I'll build on that. It starts at the top. And so Lori Reichus, our CEO, Alex Oglin, ATPCO CEO, Willie Walsh, there's communication happening between the three of them. I know Lori and Alex go to lunch periodically, and then it follows emails with, here's the work I need you to do. That comes out of that, and I'm sure Tom's receiving the same. But it doesn't just end there. There's a lot of collaboration that's happening through the various working groups and kind of peer communication that's occurring between our organizations to ensure that everyone's there's clarity in terms of not only priorities, but what people are working on, but also thinking about, hey, we heard this. I think, we know you're working on whatever. It could help the initiative, and trying to share that information so that each of these organizations can effectively bring value to the airlines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'd agree. I'd also challenge a little bit. And again, I think it's really important that we're completely aligned. And I think that's the most important word. But I think we also need to challenge one another. And that's one of the things I actually do appreciate about ATPCO. We have our differences of opinion. There are, sometimes there's friction. But what I love about the relationship we have is you can actually get in a room and, fight it out. And me and Tom have literally fought at it. But, but it's really important that we keep on challenging one another and we keep on pushing the boundary. And you may do things which we don't fully agree with, but at least we're there in the room together discussing with one another and saying, is that really what you want to do? I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, I agree completely. I'd almost, we all have the same owners. We're all airline-owned companies, and so it's kind of like a family reunion. Anyone been to a big family reunion? You all have the same mom and dad. But basically, when you get together with siblings, sometimes you're going to have difference of opinions of what's really the priority, what's really the next thing to do. And I think we need to work through those because you learn from the other as well, and you challenge each other's perspective, and you make it more well-rounded. And then when you do have a common, really goal that you're really trying to drive for, I think we can be very effective. Just like as a family reunion, and you're actually all towing together, you're all in it for each other and trying to move it forward. So that's when it becomes very effective.
Yeah.
And what we got to remember is that we aren't the enemies of one another. I work in the passenger facilitation and some of the immigration stuff, and I'm working very closely with a couple of firms who are working with the low-cost carriers. And when you see the stuff in this area, which the low-cost carriers are going to be coming at us with over the coming years, it's truly astonishing. So if you look at offers and orders, it's all what's happened basically what's happened is the low-cost carriers have come in, they've started selling the things which we used to give away for free. So that's been the trajectory over the last couple of years. And, we're playing catch-up. The reality is that we're kind of now, well, not now, but over the last couple of years, we're starting to charge for them. Some of the stuff I've seen coming out of the low-cost carriers, they're going to start offering services which are far superior to what we as full-service carriers are offering. We need to be in front of that. And again, it's what I always tell our teams. We can no longer just be in a position where we're reacting. We need to be the ones who are driving change rather than the full-service carriers. And that's really where our focus needs to be. And that's where we need to be arguing and bickering and challenging one another as to how exactly we can make that fundamental change, rather than just incremental changes. And that's a little bit one of the things, again, I'm new to NDC, I'm new to offers and orders, but are we moving quickly enough? Some of the stuff I see, I kind of go, we're not moving quickly enough. We need to be a lot more dynamic than we're being at the moment if we're going to compete with these guys in the future. And again, I love the low-cost carriers. Ryanair is one of my heroes. I hate flying them, but you look at what they do. Yeah, but you look at what they do. They challenge, and that's what we've got to do.
So Alan, and that's a nice segue here into as we're getting to our final question, and then we're going to maybe go to some of these audience questions, which would be to ask the three of you to kind of look ahead to the future. And you've done that a bit in your response there. But anything else just briefly on a prediction for the next 5 years as far as airline retailing?
Again, this is a little bit of a personal view, but I really think we need to start challenging ourselves and moving much more quickly. We have to get to offers and orders more quickly. We need to start having more dynamic solutions out there. And for me, that is absolutely critical. If we don't do that, we are going to get killed in the future. And we're going to have more airlines going into Chapter 11. So I think we've just got to up our game. And I know IATA may not always be the quickest, but we're trying to push things as hard as we can. And, that's a little bit the reason why we're getting closer to ATPCO, because we know we're not arrogant enough to say that we can do everything. Maybe in the past we were a little bit, but from my perspective, we have to, we have to recognize where we can work together to advance things more quickly. And that's a little bit what we're doing. And also with ARC, by the way.
Yeah. Steve, any predictions?
It may not be controversial, but the role and power of data is just going to grow exponentially. We've heard AI come up a couple of times in panels this morning, but just there's been a consistency to how data has been available and used in this industry for a long time, and that's changing incredibly rapidly. So the opportunity is really to figure out how can we make it as easy as possible for airlines to consume data and be able to do whatever they need to do with it, whether it's benchmarking, comparisons, informing pricing strategy, et cetera, in a way that they're not spending their time managing data, but it's served up to them in a very consumable manner. And I think it's on all three of our organizations to help them get there.
I would say interoperability is going to be key. We're living in a world where you're going to have traditional processes and systems and applications as well as the offer and order, and they have to work together. That's either at a partner level, a system level, or a content level. So you have to think about interoperability, modularity. You're not going to be able to replumb the complete world in one day, so you're going to have to figure out how to unplug pieces and putting them in. So we have to really think about modularity and how to unlock the capabilities in order to move it forward. And then I would say the last big opportunity is we're going to be in an exploratory world still. I think there's still a lot of things are known and some things are unknown. So MVPs, POCs, moving it forward is going to be critical for the next 5 years for us to really evolve as an industry and take a little bit of a exploratory world in order to move it forward. Otherwise, you'll be stagnated and kind of stuck. And I think we all want to move forward.
Okay. So we do have several questions that have come in from the audience, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. We'll start off with maybe just a quick answer from each of you on what is the biggest challenge in collaboration. You've talked about the benefits and why it needs to happen and what you're doing, but what is a challenge?
From my perspective, it's where do we collaboration? Where do we not compete? But, again, IATA, we are very focused in on standards, and in standards, the collaboration there is to bring ATPCO in, all other parties in together and create standards for an open ecosystem which is completely interoperable. So where do we draw the line there? And then where do we say, okay, what solutions do we need to develop together? So one part is the standards and the other part is that other 10% which I talked about, which is where we're going to develop those solutions. And where to draw that line, I think, is always a little bit of a challenge between our organizations.
I think for me, each of these organizations is governed by whether it's the board of governors or boards of directors. And so the organizations have priorities that are set by their, by the governance framework that's put in place, and successfully executing against sort of the individual strategies while trying to find points of intersection so that we can collaborate and kind of bring that, 1 + 1 = 3 type of value to the industry.
So, and we know this is a family reunion, right? So what is the challenge of this family reunion?
I would say sometimes putting yourself aside and thinking about how to move the industry forward, which means that if you're going to partner and work together, just like as you do as a family, sometimes you have to say, okay, for me, that means I'm going to take a little bit less here. I'm going to focus more over there to support that and grow. And I think that's a hard one for anyone to do, is saying, how do you actually do that and not think of me first? And I think that's one that actually gets in it. And maybe it's the prioritization and everything, but then the next step is actually the implementation.
Okay. All right. We have a next question. Of course, generative AI seems what everybody is talking about these days. The question is generative AI going to solve NDC standard issues by replacing API interactions with agent-to-agent interactions between sellers and airlines? We may need more than the time we have left to really get into this, but any quick thoughts on that?
I think it's the hope that it actually improves the expedition of scaling and enablement of it. I think it's unseen yet if it will prove to be. I do believe that there is some foundational data that's going to be needed in order to feed the generative AI and the foundational data benefits from having a better clarity of definition and accuracy of it. So I think there's still a role for standards and data definition in order to feed the generative AI model. So I don't know if it'll completely replace, but hopefully it expedites and enables and unlocks.
Yeah, it's moving so fast, right? You know, it's almost hard to predict what. But any other thoughts?
No, it depends on the use case is really what came to mind for me in that when that question popped, because I was thinking maybe, right? But it really depends. And, there's, depending on the, for example, if it's like going from offer to order, right? There's a transaction that takes place and there's an integrity to the data that you want to ensure. And I'm not sure synthetic data is always going to be appropriate.
I defer to the last speaker. Just don't know.
Yeah.
Just don't know. Do any of us really know what's coming down the road with generative AI?
Yeah.
Scary. It's scary, but it's great opportunities as well.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we have another question. Virtual interlining enables some aspects of retailing collaboration. Do you find usable lessons in this approach?
I thought IATA's Mr. Interline. Come on now, you have the Mitra.
Yeah, you are right, but that is not my particular area of expertise. I'm not gonna go on that one, I'm afraid.
I think the whole setup process for Interline it's long and laborious in the traditional world. You have to establish a Mitra, you have to create base amounts, you have to create prorate factors, you have to do all this stuff, and that takes a long process and enablement. I think the idea is, and the hope is, with virtual interlining, you can remove some of those barriers, some of the setup, and actually get connectivity on a virtual interline basis much more faster and enabling that. And we actually have a in-depth workshop coming up on interoperability where we're talking about how to maybe bring that settlement information forward in order to rethink how settlement's going to flow in the future. So stay tuned for that one.
Okay. And we have one more question. What more can industry organizations do to support smaller carriers or those in emerging markets in keeping up with tech and regulatory changes?
That's a subject very dear to my own heart. We sometimes I think if we were to look at most of the airlines in here, you're the big carriers. Our industry tends to focus. We tend to bring all the larger carriers together. And when I go to things like the IATA AGM, you speak to the smaller carriers, and they're like, "You guys are IATA. You're not really relevant to us." So we have to do so much better with engaging with those smaller airlines. What I would say is what we're doing is, and again, it comes back to standards and incubators, etc. What we need to do is put standards out there, foster competition, so that you have many different providers out there who are going to provide solutions to airlines at low cost. Because those smaller airlines, they can't afford huge developments which you guys make. We need to make sure that there's a really vibrant ecosystem of providers out there which can provide them with the solutions they need at low cost.
I'd build on that, and the core. I mentioned the 80%, the 20% stat before, but that means 80% of the tickets that are running through ARC are still EDIFACT, right? And I think there's a recognition that it's going to take a really long time for this industry to evolve and change, and the capital-intensive nature of this change. It's critical that we continue to support airlines to do business the way they want to do business, right? And so for us, this is going to be this period where there's going to be EDIFACT, NDC, and orders all happening in parallel with one another. And I think through the work we do through our various working groups in terms of raise awareness to the travel tech ecosystem of the needs of the various airlines so that scalable solutions can be brought and so that they be affordable, it can be affordably accessible to a smaller airline is really critical for the health of the industry.
Okay.
And that's right. Time. Just two quick things to kind of echo what Ark said. We are focused on 450 airlines. Some of them are very, very small. Some are the very, very large. And we're trying to make sure that we meet them where they're at in order to make them evolve or help them evolve to where they want to be. And then we also are focused really on how to make sure that it works in a seamless world. So we do need to make sure we understand that there's going to be a whole divergence of, I would say, of capabilities throughout the next few years.
Okay. Those are some great questions, and thank you all for your willingness to answer those. So we are out of time. Thank you so much, Alan, Steve, and Tom.
Thanks, Mitra.
Thank you.
Yep.